Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to share card making with printed papers. Now, printed papers aren't something that I generally am drawn to. I definitely like buying them and collecting them, but I tend to use solid cardstock more than printed papers. I'm using the new Rosie Studio Hello It's Me 6-inch paper pad, as well as the beautiful butterfly embellishments that are perfect. They have 2 layers to them. One sticks to the surface and the other pops up, so it gives some natural dimension to whatever you're putting them on. Now, if I do use printed papers, I love combining them with my other supplies. For this video, I'm specifically combining them with my press plates. For the first card, I'm using the Sending Love press plate. This is one that's come out recently, and it's a beautiful font that is perfect for just sending out cards of encouragement or just sending love. So I have a piece of printed paper from the 6-inch paper pad. I trimmed it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I have it taped to the top part of my Betterpress system, and I took the Sending Love press plate and put it on the base, making sure that it was facing the way that I wanted, as well as close to the edge, because I don't want to be using a ton of this cardstock. I want to make sure that I'm using the paper responsibly. So I don't want to do this right in the middle and have a bunch of waste. I inked my press plate with some VersaMark ink, and I'm going to emboss the sentiment with gold embossing powder. This is not only going to add a beautiful gold sentiment, but it's also going to have the raised edge from doing heat embossing. And I love using my Betterpress often because you can use it with so many different papers, and you can also use it with so many different inks, and it's perfect for doing embossing like this. So by having that raised embossed sentiment, not only do you have the beautiful scripty font, but you also have the metallic accent to it. I'm die cutting these pieces with the Fresh Picked Labels die set. This has a bunch of different layers and sizes of these fresh picked labels, so you can pick and choose which are the perfect sizes for the look that you're going to get or want. Here I'm using several different printed papers. If I'm going to be using some printed papers, I might as well use a few of them that I feel complement each other. I put the size of the Fresh Picked Labels die set that I wanted on my embossed piece here. I taped it in place to make sure that it was going to stay where I wanted it to. And then I have a couple sizes a little bit larger that I'm going to put onto the different printed papers and die cut them as well. Now, because those pieces don't have specific words or something that I want centered, I don't bother using the tape on them. I just put the cardstock or the paper. It is fairly thin paper, so it's perfect for adding layers to cards, but I wouldn't use it as a base for a card because it's far too light for that. If you wanted it for a base for something, you would definitely want to back it with some thicker cardstock. But those pieces, I just put them in my die cutting machine and put the size of the die cut that I want on it and just run it through. Now, to add just a little bit more interest to my card, I'm using the largest size of the Fresh Picked Labels die set, and I'm using it with my card base. So the folded edge I have placed just inside the cutting die part, or the cutting edge of this die. I am turning my plates to the opposite side so that the die part of that die is facing up. When you're die cutting, the majority of the pressure is from the top of the machine, especially with the Platinum 6, as well as the Sizzix Big Shot that I have used in the past. So I want the most pressure on here because I'm using a thick card base, and as well as the fact that there are 2 layers. And rather than put it through my machine several times, by flipping the plates over and having the die facing up, I can get the most pressure on it. And then I don't take the tape off of my pieces until I'm sure that it is cut all the way through. Once I have that out of my die set, I can glue my layers onto my card. And here I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. I use liquid glue for pretty much everything because not only does it go a long way economically, but it also takes very little glue. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room for moving and shimming things in place. Once I have all of those layers on my card, I can take the butterfly that I want to use and put it on my card base. And this butterfly embellishment pack has several different, or 2 different sizes, plus a few different colors. So you can pick and choose which one is going to work best for the look that you're going for. Because I have a shaped card and the bottom part of that sticker went over the edge, I just used my detail scissors to just trim that excess part off. And the only reason I did that was because there's adhesive on there, so it's sticky, and I don't want that to stick to everything. Because I have full wings on the raised part, The only way that anyone would notice is if they specifically looked to see if that bottom part was glued off. And you can see how well these butterflies flatten to put into an envelope, but you can easily pop, or they easily pop up when you take them out of the envelope. That's how quick it was to create that card. Because it had all of those printed papers, there was very little extra to do. And that embellishment of the butterfly just added the perfect touch to it. We didn't need anything more than that. For my second card, I have another couple pieces of the printed paper from that 6-inch paper pad, and I'm going to be using the Soaring Sentiments press plate set. This is another new press plate that has come from a collection recently. This one was from the Simon Hurley kite themed collection. One of those printed papers, this one here that I'm going to be doing my sentiments on, I trimmed it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I'm taping it to my clear plate. And then I'm also going to be using the VersaMark ink on this press plate. Once again, I want to emboss these sentiments, especially when it's printed papers. I think the addition of the embossing, the raised plus the glossy surface, just adds a little bit more interest, and it makes it pop off of the surface a little bit better. This particular press plate does all of these sentiments all at one time. So I'm going to have a bunch of extra ones that I can use for future projects. I'm not going to be using them for this particular video. I will be using them for future projects. So I will just keep them with that press plate set, so I have them to pick and choose from later. For this embossing, I'm using some Scorched Timber Distress Glaze. Now, Distress Glaze is embossing powder, but it's transparent. Because the Scorched Timber is so dark and the printed paper that I am using is so light, you're really not going to see the print through it. But if you were to use something that was a little bit more solid, say like a silhouette press plate or something with a lighter Distress Glaze and maybe a more prominent print underneath, you would see that detail under there. For this, I mainly chose it for the color. I didn't have a solid or opaque brown embossing powder, and I wanted the browns because there's a tiny little bit of brown in the details of some of the prints here. So I wanted that to tie in, and I wanted to make sure that my embossed sentiment was going to be seen on top of that printed paper. So once I have that embossed, I can put on the matching die set and die cut all of those sentiments, and they're die cut all at once. Now, because this paper is fairly thin, I took a piece of scrap white paper and I'm just going to die cut that sentiment die cut again. So then I can glue those to the back of the sentiments and just give them a little bit more substance, make them stick up a little bit more and just make them a little bit stronger. I'm only doing this one time because I definitely don't need a lot of dimension for my sentiment. If you wanted to have more dimension, you could do a couple of these and then layer them together. For this, I'm mainly just giving it a little bit more substance from that printed paper. And then I can match up the scrap cardstock die cut with the embossed one and use that Barely Art glue to glue it together. For this card, I am using a solid piece of Fern Cardstock to go on my card base. Again, I'm using the Barely Art glue to glue it together. I have it trimmed to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. And the printed paper that I'm using for my background, I have that trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So I want to see as much of this printed paper as possible, but I still wanted to have a little bit of a border around it just to give it a little bit of a frame. And that Fern Cardstock ties in with the greenery on that typewriter and the florals and stuff like that. So with that background done, I can add my sentiment, and then all that's left to do is add one of those butterfly embellishments. And again, I can pick and choose which would work best, whether the larger butterfly works best, whether the smaller one works best. For this one, I chose a larger one because I have a larger area. And then I also took one of the sentiments to put on the inside of the card because it worked well with the one that was on the front. And I figured I might as well use more than one sentiment because I made so many for this. Anytime I have these extra sentiments, I just take a little Ziploc bag and I put them with that press plate set. I know that if I ever want that sentiment again or want some of those sentiments, I'll just look through that Ziploc bag just to see if I have one that's already made that's going to work. For my third card, I'm using the Mirror Arch Nested Sprigs press plate set. I'm putting those on the base of that Betterpress system, and I'm using some Chiffon Cardstock. This is a really nice light peachy colored cardstock. It's going to work really well with the printed or the pressed image from this press plate. And I'm using some Scorched Timber Distressing. It's going to tie in well with my second card, as well as give me that detail. Now, when I'm using distress inks on press plates, sometimes I have to do them multiple times. For this particular one, I only wanted to really do it a second time for the center part of that detail. The floral and the greenery around the edges, I kind of liked it being a little bit, some areas lighter, some areas darker, but for the inner part with the sentiment, I wanted to make sure that that was nice and crystal clear. So I re-inked that part, put my top part onto my base, and then put it through my Platinum 6 machine again. And you may notice I have some Best Ever Craft tape on the base of my Betterpress. That's to keep that bottom gray mat completely secure so that I know it's not going to shift on me, and I can do my Betterpressing multiple times and it's going to go in the same place as long as I haven't accidentally moved my press plate. For this particular card, I'm using the Mirror Arch label die set, and I'm using it in a couple different sizes to do some of the different layers. The first one is going to cut out the center part from my Betterpress image. So I'm going to have this Betterpress image on the outside or the background of my card, but I'm also going to have it for the center part with that sentiment. I do use my Best Ever Craft tape to tape that die down to make sure that it's not going to move on me when I'm die cutting it. For the rest of the layers, I can just put my cardstock in there or my printed paper in there, and I can just lay the die on there and run it through. I don't need to worry about that moving because there's nothing in there that I need to have cut perfectly. The cardstock for this particular layer, this one that I'm doing, another one of the Mirror Arch label die sets, is Indigo Cardstock. I'm also going to be using that for the background of my card. So it's going to be a frame around this nested arch or Mirror Arch Nested Sprigs pressed image. I'm trimming this down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And then I'm going to have the indigo behind it just to give that a little bit of a frame. There's not a whole lot of area around there. And actually it might not be 4 inches by 5 1/4. I might have trimmed that to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 because the indigo is so thin around there. There's not a lot of extra area to trim that down, and I didn't want to be cutting into that pressed image. So I took that Indigo cardstock and I glued that to my card base, and I do have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card base here. Then I can glue down the nested sprigs on the Chiffon Cardstock piece. Then I'm going to glue down one of my printed papers, and you may have noticed that my indigo piece plus my chiffon piece, I have those pieces die cut out of the center of there, but because I have a bunch of layers on here, no one is ever going to know that some of the layers were die cut out of the lower pieces. I do this regularly. It just makes your cardstock go just a little bit farther, and it's a great way to just utilize that cardstock. This is especially helpful for specialty cardstocks, but I do it with regular stuff as well. To add just a little bit more color to the nested sprigs image, I'm using some Tombow markers to color it. So the corally color that I'm using for the flowers is 772. And then I have 2 greens that I'm using for the greenery. So I'm using 249, which is the darker green, and 312, which is more of a sage green. If you wanted, you could choose just one green, but because there's so much greenery around that outer image and so few florals, I thought by having 2 greens there, it just gave it a little bit more variety, and it was a little bit more visually appealing rather than have one solid or one colored green throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to color some of them with the lighter green, some of them with the darker green, and then I do leave some of them that aren't colored at all. To add a little bit of extra sparkle to it, I'm also using a Stardust gel pen. And that's a gel pen that doesn't really have a lot of color to it, but it does add a beautiful sparkle. So you can put it over top of a color, and it's not going to cover that color, but when you tilt it into the light, it's giving it just a little bit more color. For this coloring, I'm not doing precise coloring here. I'm just coloring it very, very quickly. It's more for the detail and for the color itself than for precision. So after coloring that outer edge, I figured the inside layer with my sentiment just needed a little bit of extra color too. So I took that 772 color. This is the color that I used for the florals on the outer edge. And I just did that for the border around the inside piece as well. And once again, I'm not doing perfect coloring. I'm staying within the lines, but I'm doing it fairly quickly. Tombow markers are a dye-based marker, and cardstock really doesn't like dye-based markers, especially if you go over the same area a couple times. It starts to pill the paper, so I do it very quickly so that the paper does not pill. This is after coloring it with just the Tombow markers, and this is when I decided it needed just a little bit of extra sparkle. So using that Stardust gel pen just adds that extra little bit of sparkle, but it doesn't cover that color in any way. When you look at it, you don't really see much, but when you tilt it into the light, it's going to just add that extra little bit that's going to catch the light. I'm also going to use it for the centers of the flowers, just to give it a little bit of sparkle, and then a few of the leaves, again, just for a little bit of sparkle. I didn't want to add more color to it. I didn't want all the colors with the printed paper competing with each other, but just adding that little extra bit of sparkle to it just gives it some more visual appeal and makes your eye look at different areas of the card. So here is the finished card, and you can see we don't see a lot of the printed paper here. We do see some of it, but it does tie in all the colors for that color palette. Now the last step with this card is to add those butterfly stickers. And I started by adding a couple of the smaller ones and then decided that I wanted to do the yellow ones in the package just because they were going to show up on the Chiffon Cardstock a little bit better. So I used one of the large ones towards the bottom and then one of the smaller ones towards the top. And again, you can see how perfectly they lie nice and flat to go into an envelope, but those wings just pop right up, and they're on there nice and securely because the back of the butterfly sticker is completely adhesive, so it sticks to the background of the card. Then we have the second card with that typewriter printed paper, and then our pressed sentiment and the butterfly. And you can see how quick and easy these cards were to put together. So even though printed papers aren't necessarily something that I am drawn to or use a ton of, they do make it really quickly to get some cards together quite easily. Because you already have a color palette, you don't have to choose one. You can just choose solid colors to go with it. And then whatever sentiments or embellishments, if you don't already have them. In this case, I already had the butterflies to coordinate with them, and you can make some gorgeous cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.